The moment you destroy an innocent person, fate begins counting the days until the truth returns. Snow swept across the central square of Moonridge Pack in thick white waves, covering rooftops, statues, and stone pathways beneath a cold winter sky. Hundreds of wolves stood gathered despite the storm. Their dark coats fluttered in the wind as whispers moved through the crowd like restless ghosts. At the center of the square stood Emily Carter. Her hands trembled from the cold, but she refused to lower her head. Snowflakes settled in her blonde hair and melted against her pale skin. The simple gray cloak wrapped around her shoulders offered little protection from the freezing air. Yet the cold was not what hurt most. The pain came from the silence surrounding her. No one stepped forward. No one defended her. No one questioned the accusation that had brought her here. Above the crowd, standing on the raised stone platform reserved for rulers, Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood looked down at her with an expression carved from stone. His black royal coat moved gently in the wind. The silver crest of the kingdom gleamed against his chest. To most people, he looked powerful, unshakable, certain. Emily remembered a different man. She remembered the Alpha who once smiled at her beneath summer skies. The Alpha who once listened when she spoke. The Alpha who once made her believe she mattered. That man felt very far away now. An advisor stepped forward holding a rolled document. His voice echoed across the square. Emily Carter stands accused of betraying the pack and sharing protected information with rival territories. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Emily closed her eyes briefly. The accusation was a lie. She knew it. Somewhere deep down, she wanted to believe Nathaniel knew it too. Yet when she looked toward him, she saw no hesitation. Only distance. Only judgment. The advisor continued reading. The words blended with the sound of the wind. Emily barely heard them. Her attention remained fixed on Nathaniel. She searched his face for doubt, for regret, for anything that might suggest he questioned the charges against her. There was nothing. When the advisor finally finished, the entire square fell silent. Nathaniel stepped forward. The storm seemed to quiet around him. "Emily Carter," he said. His deep voice carried effortlessly through the air. "You have been found guilty." A sharp ache spread through Emily's chest. Not because of the sentence. Because he believed it. Or at least he believed it enough to stand there and say those words. Nathaniel continued. "You are hereby stripped of your standing within Moonridge Pack and permanently exiled beyond the northern border." Gasps moved through parts of the crowd. Exile. In winter. Alone. Emily stared at him. The snow continued falling between them. For one impossible second, she expected him to stop, to change his mind, to look closer. Instead, Nathaniel simply raised his hand. The decision was final. Emily swallowed hard and forced herself to stand straighter. If this was how her story ended, she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. Without another word, she turned away from the square. The crowd slowly parted to let her pass. Snow covered her footprints almost as quickly as she made them. Behind her stood the kingdom she once called home. Ahead lay only frozen wilderness and uncertainty. What nobody knew, including the Alpha King himself, was that fate had already begun writing a very different ending. And beneath Emily's heart, a secret had started to grow. The first night beyond the northern border felt colder than anything Emily had ever known. The wind moved across the frozen wilderness with a lonely howl, carrying snow through the dark forest and across the narrow trail beneath her boots. Moonridge Pack had disappeared behind miles of white mountains, yet the memory of the square remained painfully clear. Every word, every stare, every second Nathaniel had looked at her without mercy. Emily pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders and continued walking. She had no destination. Exile rarely came with instructions. It only came with distance. By dawn, exhaustion settled deep into her muscles. She had spent hours crossing frozen terrain beneath a sky filled with stars that offered no warmth. When the first pale sunlight appeared over the horizon, she finally discovered an abandoned hunting cabin near the edge of a pine forest. The structure was old but standing. Snow covered the roof, and several wooden boards needed repair, yet it offered shelter. For now, that was enough. Emily stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Silence immediately surrounded her. No judgment, no whispers, no accusing eyes. For the first time since the exile began, she allowed herself to breathe. The days that followed settled into a difficult routine. Each morning, she gathered firewood, melted snow for water, and searched the forest for anything useful. Her grandmother had taught her basic survival skills years ago. Those lessons became her lifeline. She learned where to find edible roots beneath the frozen soil and which winter berries remained safe to eat. Slowly, the cabin began to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. Yet loneliness remained. Some evenings, she found herself staring into the fire while memories surfaced without permission. Nathaniel laughing beside a river during summer. Nathaniel helping her climb a rocky trail. Nathaniel promising that nothing would ever come between them. The memories hurt more than the cold. One morning, several weeks after her exile, Emily woke before sunrise feeling unusually tired. At first, she blamed the winter weather. Survival required constant effort. Fatigue seemed natural. Yet as the days passed, other changes followed. Certain foods suddenly made her uneasy. Strong scents lingered longer than before. Even simple tasks left her short of breath. Emily tried ignoring the signs. She focused on gathering supplies and repairing the cabin. But the strange feeling continued growing. One afternoon, while collecting firewood near a frozen stream, dizziness forced her to sit down on a fallen tree. Snow drifted quietly through the air around her. She pressed a hand against her stomach as concern settled into her chest. The possibility appeared almost immediately. She did not want to consider it. Yet once the thought arrived, it refused to leave. That evening she sat beside the fireplace holding a worn journal that once belonged to her grandmother. Many of its pages contained notes about health, healing, and women's wellness. Emily carefully read each section by candlelight. Her hands trembled with every page she turned. By the time she reached the end, tears filled her eyes. Not from fear. Not entirely. From certainty. Outside, snow continued falling across the wilderness. Inside the cabin, Emily stared into the flames and slowly rested both hands over her stomach. Alone in the frozen north, abandoned by the kingdom she once loved, she realized she was no longer alone at all. And far beyond the mountains, the Alpha King who had cast her away remained completely unaware that his future was growing beneath her heart. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the northern wilderness as the weeks passed. Snow still covered much of the forest, but patches of earth had begun appearing beneath the trees. Small streams once trapped beneath ice now flowed again, carrying the sound of moving water through the quiet woods surrounding Emily's cabin. Life was returning to the world, and inside the small cabin, another life continued growing. Emily stood near the window one morning watching sunlight filter through the pine branches. Her hand rested gently against her stomach. The movement was slight, almost impossible to notice, yet each day made the reality feel more certain. She was going to be a mother. The thought still felt unreal at times. There were moments when fear arrived unexpectedly. How would she protect a child alone? How would she provide for someone when survival already demanded so much? Yet every time doubt appeared, another feeling rose beside it. Determination. The child had done nothing wrong. Whatever happened next, Emily would make sure that innocence never paid for the mistakes of others. Her days settled into a new rhythm. She gathered food, repaired the cabin, and spent evenings reading her grandmother's journal beside the fireplace. Entire sections focused on pregnancy, nutrition, and caring for infants. Emily studied every page carefully. The book became both teacher and companion during the long nights. Some evenings, she found herself smiling while reading advice written decades earlier in her grandmother's careful handwriting. It felt like receiving guidance from someone who was no longer there. One afternoon, after finishing her daily chores, Emily walked to a nearby hill overlooking the valley. The snow had melted enough to reveal patches of green grass. Wildflowers would soon return. She sat beneath a tall pine tree and allowed herself a rare moment of peace. Birds sang somewhere in the distance. A gentle breeze moved through the branches overhead. For the first time since her exile, she felt something close to happiness. Not because her life had become easier, because she finally understood what she was fighting for. As she sat there, her thoughts drifted toward Nathaniel. The memories no longer arrived as sharply as before. The wounds remained, but they had changed. The anger had faded into sadness. The sadness had gradually transformed into acceptance. She no longer imagined returning to Moonridge. She no longer imagined Nathaniel arriving to explain everything. Some doors, once closed, never reopened. Emily understood that now. Her future belonged here. To her child. To the small life she was building one careful day at a time. That evening, a storm rolled across the mountains. Rain tapped gently against the cabin roof while thunder echoed far away beyond the forest. Emily sat beside the fireplace holding her grandmother's journal. One particular entry caught her attention. It described the first time her grandmother heard the heartbeat of an unborn child using an old healer's technique. Curious, Emily followed the instructions. She settled comfortably beside the fire and placed her hands where the journal suggested. For several moments, she heard nothing except the crackling flames. Then she froze. Faint, soft, steady. A tiny rhythm hidden beneath her own. Tears immediately filled her eyes. The sound lasted only a moment, yet it changed everything. Emily smiled through her tears and gently closed her eyes. For the first time, the child felt real in a way words could never capture. Somewhere beneath her heart existed a tiny person already depending on her. Outside, the storm continued across the wilderness. Inside, Emily made a silent promise. No matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter how difficult the future became, she would protect this child with everything she had. And far beyond the northern forests, the father of that child remained completely unaware that the future heir of his kingdom already had a heartbeat. Spring arrived in Moonridge several months after Emily's exile, but inside the royal palace, Nathaniel Blackwood found little comfort in the changing season. Warm sunlight now reached the castle windows. Snow had vanished from the courtyards. Gardens once buried beneath winter frost bloomed with color again. Yet something remained unsettled beneath the surface of his carefully ordered life. At first, he blamed exhaustion. The responsibilities of ruling an entire kingdom rarely allowed rest. Trade disputes demanded attention. Border negotiations filled his days. Advisors crowded every hour with new concerns. Still, whenever silence finally arrived, his thoughts drifted somewhere he did not want them to go. They drifted north. More specifically, they drifted toward a pair of blue eyes he had tried very hard to forget. One evening, Nathaniel stood alone on a balcony overlooking the capital. Lanterns glowed throughout the city below, while music drifted faintly upward from distant celebrations. The kingdom prospered. The people felt safe. By every measurable standard, he was succeeding as a ruler. Yet an uncomfortable feeling lingered. It had started weeks earlier. Small details that once seemed insignificant now returned to his mind with surprising clarity. Emily's expression during the trial, the hesitation in her voice, the complete absence of fear when she declared her innocence. Nathaniel rested both hands against the stone railing. Something about the memory refused to leave him. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called. The door behind him opened. Marcus Hale, one of his most trusted advisors, stepped onto the balcony carrying a collection of reports. "The investigation regarding the eastern trade routes is complete," Marcus said. Nathaniel nodded distractedly. As Marcus reviewed the findings, another document slipped from the stack and fell to the floor. Marcus immediately bent down to retrieve it, but Nathaniel noticed a familiar name written across the page. Emily Carter. His attention sharpened instantly. "What is that?" Marcus looked surprised. "An old archive report from the exile case." Nathaniel extended his hand. "Let me see it." Several moments later, he stood reading the document beneath the balcony lantern. His expression gradually hardened. Certain statements felt strangely incomplete. Witness testimonies that should have contained signatures did not. Supporting evidence referenced attachments that no longer appeared in the records. Small inconsistencies. Individually insignificant. Together troubling. Nathaniel read the pages again. Then a third time. The uneasy feeling inside him deepened. "Who organized this investigation?" he asked quietly. Marcus frowned. "The original council committee." Nathaniel lowered the papers. "And no one questioned these missing sections." Marcus stepped closer. His own expression changed as he reviewed the document. "I assumed the records were complete." Nathaniel remained silent. The answer failed to satisfy him. That night's sleep never came. Instead, memories returned. Emily laughing beside a river years earlier. Emily helping elderly villagers during winter storms. Emily spending hours caring for injured animals without expecting recognition. None of those memories matched the woman described in the accusations. By sunrise, Nathaniel stood inside the royal archives reviewing additional records personally. dust-covered shelves stretching across the enormous chamber. Page after page passed through his hands. Slowly, a disturbing possibility began taking shape. What if Emily had been telling the truth? The thought refused to leave. And for the first time since the day he sentenced her, Nathaniel found himself wondering whether the greatest mistake of his life had already been made. The question followed Nathaniel everywhere after that day in the archives. What if Emily had been innocent? It appeared during council meetings. It lingered beside him during official ceremonies. It waited for him in the silence of every sleepless night. The more he examined the old records, the less confidence he had in the judgment he once considered unquestionable. 3 days later, he ordered a complete review of the original investigation. Advisors moved through the archives gathering documents, witness statements, and reports that had not been examined since the trial. Most expected the process to confirm what everyone already believed. Instead, the opposite began happening. Missing pages appeared where complete reports should have existed. Dates failed to match official timelines. Testimonies seemed strangely similar, as though multiple witnesses had repeated the same prepared language. Nathaniel sat through every review personally. Each inconsistency added weight to the growing unease inside him. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Emily's life continued quietly in the northern wilderness. Summer approached. Wildflowers spread across the valley surrounding the cabin. Her stomach had become impossible to hide now. Every morning, she stepped outside and watched sunlight move across the mountains while speaking softly to the child growing beneath her heart. The future remained uncertain, but she no longer feared it the way she once had. The child gave purpose to every difficult day. Back in Moonridge, the breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. An elderly pack member named Walter Green requested a private audience with the Alpha King. Nathaniel almost declined. The man had retired years earlier and rarely involved himself in royal affairs. Yet something in the request caught his attention. By sunset, Walter stood inside Nathaniel's private chamber. Age had bent his shoulders, but his eyes remained sharp. He looked nervous, not because he stood before the Alpha King, because he carried a burden that had become too heavy to ignore. "Your Majesty," Walter began quietly. "I should have spoken sooner." Nathaniel set aside the document he had been reading. "About Emily Carter?" Walter nodded. Silence filled the room. Then the old man reached into his coat and carefully removed a sealed envelope. The paper showed signs of age. "I found this the week after the trial," Walter said. "I was afraid to come forward. At the time, too many powerful people wanted the case closed." Nathaniel accepted the envelope and broke the seal. Inside rested several letters. As he read the first page, his expression changed. Then the second, then the third. The letters revealed private communications between two council members involved in the original investigation. Discussions about removing Emily from the pack. Concerns about her growing influence among younger wolves. References to creating evidence strong enough to force exile. Nathaniel felt his pulse quicken. Every word pushed him closer to a truth he had not wanted to imagine. Emily had not been judged fairly. She had been targeted. Walter lowered his gaze. "I believed someone else would expose it," he said softly. "No one ever did." Nathaniel stared at the letters long after the old man finished speaking. The room felt suddenly smaller. The memories returned again. Emily standing alone in the snow. Emily insisting she was innocent. Emily looking at him as he delivered the sentence. For the first time, Nathaniel understood something that chilled him more than any winter storm ever could. He had not simply failed to protect her. He had helped destroy the life of the one person who had trusted him most. And somewhere beyond the northern mountains, Emily was still living with the consequences of his mistake. The truth spread through Nathaniel's world like a crack moving across glass. Once he saw it, he could not unsee it. Every document he reviewed revealed another piece of the deception. Every witness re-examined exposed another flaw in the investigation. The exile that had once seemed justified now looked increasingly like a carefully constructed lie. Yet even as that realization settled over him, another discovery waited just beyond the horizon. It arrived 2 weeks later through a traveling healer named Abigail Mercer. She had spent most of the spring visiting isolated settlements beyond the northern border, offering medical care to families living far from the kingdom's larger towns. Her reports rarely attracted attention. This one changed everything. Nathaniel sat in his private office reviewing correspondence when Marcus entered carrying a sealed document. "This arrived from the Northern Territories," Marcus said. "I believe you should read it immediately." Nathaniel accepted the report and broke the seal. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Abigail described weather conditions, local harvests, and the health of several communities. Then one paragraph caught his attention. His eyes stopped moving. The room became completely silent. He read the lines again, and then a third time. According to Abigail's observations, an exiled Omega woman matching Emily Carter's description had been living alone in a remote cabin beyond the border. The healer mentioned providing basic prenatal guidance during a brief visit several weeks earlier. Nathaniel's heartbeat slowed, then accelerated. His gaze locked on a single sentence. The woman appeared to be carrying a child approximately 6 months into pregnancy. For several moments, Nathaniel simply stared at the page. The world around him seemed distant, unreal. His thoughts raced backward through time. Dates, memories, conversations. The final weeks before Emily's exile. Every calculation led to the same conclusion. The child could only belong to one person. Him. Nathaniel slowly lowered the report. A heavy silence filled the office. Marcus watched him carefully. "Your Majesty?" Nathaniel did not answer immediately. He stood and walked toward the window overlooking the capital. Summer sunlight filled the city below. Merchants crossed busy streets. Children played in public squares. Life continued normally. Yet nothing felt normal anymore. Somewhere beyond the mountains lived a woman he had condemned. A woman who had been innocent all along. A woman carrying his child. His heir. The realization struck deeper than any accusation ever could. Emily had faced exile alone. Emily had survived an entire winter alone. Emily had discovered her pregnancy alone. Every difficult day, every frightening night, every uncertain decision. She had carried those burdens without him because he had been the one who sent her away. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Regret settled heavily inside his chest. Not the shallow regret of a poor decision. The kind that changes a person forever. Marcus finally spoke. "Do you believe the report is accurate?" Nathaniel opened his eyes. "I do." His voice sounded quieter than usual. More human. More vulnerable. He turned back toward the room and looked again at the report resting on his desk. For months he had searched for answers about the past. Now the future stood directly in front of him. Somewhere in the northern wilderness lived the woman he had failed and the child he had never known existed. Nathaniel understood one thing with absolute certainty. The investigation was no longer enough. Apologies would never be enough. He needed to find Emily. And with every passing day, the fear grew stronger that he might already be too late. The very next morning, Nathaniel left Moonridge. He did not announce a royal procession. He did not organize a public ceremony. There were no speeches and no crowds gathered to watch him depart. Only a small group of trusted guards accompanied him beyond the city gates as the summer sun rose over the kingdom. The journey north began in silence. Nathaniel spent most of the ride staring toward the distant mountains. Every mile seemed to increase the weight already resting on his shoulders. Months earlier, Emily had crossed this same distance alone. She had walked into uncertainty carrying nothing but determination and heartbreak. Now he followed the path she had been forced to take because of his decision. The realization never left him. Days passed as the group traveled through forests, valleys, and remote settlements. Along the way, Nathaniel stopped frequently to speak with local residents. Most had little information. Some remembered seeing a young woman traveling north during winter. Others recalled hearing stories about a kind Omega who helped neighbors gather food or treated minor illnesses using herbs from the forest. Each account painted the same picture. Emily had survived not through luck, but through resilience. Hearing those stories only deepened Nathaniel's regret. The woman he had accused of betrayal had spent her exile helping strangers. Late one afternoon, the group arrived at a small settlement near the northern border. There, an elderly shopkeeper recognized Emily's description immediately. "The young woman with the blonde hair?" he asked. "She lives farther north near the Old Pine Valley." Nathaniel felt hope and fear rise together. For months he had searched for answers. Now he was finally close enough to find them. The next morning, they continued deeper into the wilderness. The roads disappeared quickly, replaced by narrow trails winding through towering pine forests. Sunlight filtered through the branches above. Birds moved between the trees. Everything seemed peaceful, yet Nathaniel's thoughts remained restless. He found himself wondering what Emily would say when she saw him. Would she refuse to speak to him? Would she walk away? He could not blame her if she did. Some wounds could not be repaired by apologies. Meanwhile, several miles ahead, Emily sat outside her cabin beneath a clear blue sky. Summer had transformed the valley. Wildflowers covered the hillsides. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine through the air. She rested in a wooden chair near the garden she had built over the past months. One hand rested against her stomach. The child had become active recently. Every small movement reminded her that the future was drawing closer. Despite everything that had happened, she felt strangely peaceful. The cabin had become home. The valley had become hers. Then a distant sound interrupted the afternoon stillness. Horses. Emily looked toward the forest path. Her heart immediately tightened. Visitors rarely came this far north. Slowly, figures began appearing between the trees. Riders. Several of them. The lead horse moved into the sunlight first. Emily froze. Even from a distance, she recognized him instantly. The broad shoulders. The dark coat. The familiar posture she had once known better than anyone. Nathaniel had found her. And as their eyes met across the valley for the first time since the day of her exile, Emily realized that neither of their lives would ever be the same again. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The summer breeze drifted across the valley, carrying the scent of wildflowers between them. Nathaniel remained beside his horse at the edge of the clearing, while Emily stood near the small garden she had built with her own hands. Months of separation seemed to stretch across the distance. Yet somehow it still felt too short for everything that had happened. Emily was the first to break eye contact. Her hand instinctively rested against her stomach. The gesture was small, but Nathaniel noticed it immediately. The sight struck him harder than any accusation ever could. Everything became real at once. The reports, the evidence, the regret, the child. Emily turned slightly toward the cabin. "Why are you here?" Her voice remained calm, but there was a distance in it he had never heard before. Nathaniel took a careful step forward. "I came to find you." Emily looked back at him. "You already found me once." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Nathaniel felt their weight immediately. Behind him, the guards quietly remained where they were, giving both of them space. No one interrupted. No one spoke. Nathaniel lowered his gaze briefly. "You were innocent." Emily said nothing. "I know that now." Silence settled between them. Birds sang somewhere beyond the trees. A stream flowed quietly nearby. The peaceful sounds only made the tension more noticeable. Emily studied him carefully. The Alpha King standing before her looked familiar, yet different. The certainty that once surrounded him had faded. In its place stood a man carrying the consequences of his choices. "Knowing now does not change what happened," she said softly. Nathaniel nodded. "I know." The honesty surprised her. She had expected explanations, excuses, defenses. Instead, he simply accepted responsibility. Nathaniel looked around the valley. The cabin, the garden, the repaired fence. Every detail revealed how she had survived alone. "You built all of this." Emily followed his gaze. There was no one else to do it. Another painful truth. Nathaniel felt it settle heavily inside his chest. Months ago, he had sent her away believing she would become someone else's concern. Instead, she had faced every challenge by herself. Emily slowly walked toward the cabin porch and sat down carefully. The pregnancy was now impossible to hide. Nathaniel remained where he was, unsure whether he deserved to come any closer. "The investigation is finished," he finally said. The people responsible confessed. The evidence was fabricated. Emily looked toward the mountains. Her expression remained unreadable. "I spent months wishing someone would believe me." Nathaniel swallowed hard. "I should have." For the first time, emotion appeared in Emily's eyes. Not anger. Something deeper. Disappointment. "Yes," she whispered. The single word hurt more than any accusation could have. Nathaniel understood then that forgiveness would not arrive because he asked for it. Trust would not return because he regretted losing it. Some damage required time. Some wounds required actions rather than promises. As the sun slowly lowered across the valley, neither of them noticed the hours passing. They simply sat surrounded by the life Emily had built from nothing. And for the first time since her exile, Nathaniel faced the full truth of what he had destroyed. The woman he once knew was gone. Standing before him now was someone stronger, wiser, and far less willing to trust. And if he wanted a place in the future of her life and their child's life, he would have to earn it. Autumn arrived by the time Emily returned to Moonridge. The journey back had not been immediate. Nathaniel never pressured her. He never demanded forgiveness. Instead, he spent weeks proving through actions that he understood the damage he had caused. When Emily finally agreed to return, it was not because the Alpha King asked her to. It was because she wanted her child to know the truth about where they came from. The day of her return, thousands gathered throughout the capital. Golden leaves drifted through the air while sunlight illuminated the city streets. Yet unlike the day of her exile, the crowd was silent for a very different reason. This time, they were waiting. Nathaniel stood at the center of the royal square where everything had once gone wrong. Advisors, nobles, merchants, guards, and ordinary citizens filled every corner of the plaza. Emily remained beside him. Her hand rested gently against her stomach as she looked across the familiar faces. Months earlier, many of those same people had watched her leave. Now they watched her return. Nathaniel stepped forward first. His voice carried across the square. Today, I stand before you not only as your Alpha King, but as a man who failed. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Nathaniel continued without hesitation. Emily Carter was innocent. Complete silence followed. The accusations against her were fabricated. The investigation was corrupted. The judgment delivered against her should never have happened. Every word echoed through the square. No excuses followed. No attempt to shift blame. Nathaniel accepted responsibility openly before the entire kingdom. Then he turned toward Emily. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The autumn wind moved gently through the square. Finally, Nathaniel addressed the crowd again. Because of my failure, an innocent woman suffered. Because of my failure, the future heir of this kingdom spent months in exile before ever taking a first breath. Gasps spread through the gathering. The secret was no longer hidden. Nathaniel looked toward Emily with visible respect. Despite everything she endured, she showed more courage, dignity, and strength than anyone had a right to expect. Emily felt emotion tighten in her chest. Not because the pain had disappeared. Some scars remained. But for the first time, the truth stood in the open where everyone could see it. Nathaniel extended an official royal decree. Emily Carter is fully restored. Her name is cleared. Her honor is restored. And her child will be recognized as a rightful heir of Moonridge. Applause began slowly. Then it spread across the square until the entire city seemed to join. Emily looked toward the sky as tears filled her eyes. Months ago, she had left this place believing everything was lost. Now she understood that survival had given her something greater than vindication. It had given her strength she never knew she possessed. As the crowd celebrated around them, Nathaniel stepped beside her. Neither reached for the other. Neither pretended the past could simply disappear. But for the first time, they stood on equal ground. The future remained uncertain. Trust would take time. Healing would take time. Yet as sunlight warmed the square and autumn leaves drifted through the air, Emily felt the child move gently beneath her heart. She smiled, not because every problem had been solved, because hope had finally returned. And this time, it belonged to her.